Hello, Professor Paul Gruhn here again, and jQuery, Web 2, Manchester Community College, and you're there. As I'm looking at Chapter 2, um, I don't scare too easy, but Chapter 2 is kind of scaring me a little bit for probably a large percentage of you. Those of you that have programming experience, if you have C, Python, Visual Basic, any programming experience, Chapter 2 should be a cakewalk for you. Those of you that have no coding experience, Chapter 2 will take some time, and I highly recommend looking at the um, extra files that are provided in the student data file and look at that code and understand that code. There are over 100 slides in this slide deck, and so that means this video has the chance of easily becoming a 2-hour long video, and I really hope not. So I am right up front going to say we are not going to cover it all. I'm going to point out the key pieces and the key points, and we're going to move along quickly. I teach a Python class. Some of you are in that Python class, and we have 8 chapters. And what do we, I think we just had an exam for chapter 3 and 4, and we're learning if statements and loops. And in those 8 chapters, we cover that in 16 weeks. Basically, they're teaching you the JavaScript language, 16 weeks worth of coding in one chapter. And then they expand on it a little bit more in chapter 3. As far as homework assignments and getting this done, please try to get your homework assignment done on time, but I will be flexible, understanding that there is just a lot of meat in this chapter to cover. But I can't stress it enough. If you allow yourself to fall behind in these early weeks, it's really hard to play catch up. So just because I said I'm going to be flexible and understanding, don't use that as a crutch or an excuse to say, oh, I'll do it later, I'll do it later. So, so let's get into the assignment and let's start seeing what this is doing. Chapter 2, again, this is going to be, there's a lot of slides to cover. We're going to learn a whole language in one chapter. Okay, boom. Basically, the first slide, and it's already covered. What are we covering in the objectives? This is basically a chapter that's going to teach you as much about JavaScript as it can in one easy lesson. One of the things that we have done is one of the assignments for week 2 is to come up with links for related to JavaScript. Already some students have provided some links for JavaScript and jQuery. This one right here, W3 Schools, is probably the world's best link for just about learning anything related to the web. And they have an excellent overview and really some hands-on stuff that you can do in learning the JavaScript language. Highly recommend looking at that. I'm hoping that this book, Murach's book, will basically say, okay, here's an overview of the language, but my day-to-day coding, I really don't do a lot of JavaScript stuff because a lot of the jQuery and a lot of the widgets that we need to do basic web development, they're already created. We just need to know how to understand them, read them, and maybe tweak them here or there. But do take a look at the resources page online on Blackboard. I also have some ebooks to download as well. And those ebooks, there's a lot of good material there. So check them out. So we are building up this resources page, and there's already some good links, and I'm sure in the next couple of few days there'll even be more as you keep finding some on the online. So we're going to get into the meat of the language, escape codes, declaring variable methods, and things like that. Don't want 2 types of attributes of the script element. Let's take a look at what page we're on there. So when you're writing your script tag right here, your script tag, let's see, Alt-Shift-D, I think? No. your script tag, right there, you tell it where to look for your code with the source attribute. Also, you can use the type attribute, but with HTML5, that's not required. And I'm on page 51 in the book, and the type attribute is saying you can go text/JavaScript for type code. But by default, you don't need it. In the olden days, we used to put it there just to be sure that the browsers knew what it was doing. There are two ways of, and I'm still on 50 and 55. Just like with CSS, you can put JavaScript code in your web page up in the header section, or a lot of people also put it in the footer section of the web page. Then it loads up a little quicker sometimes. That's called embedding JavaScript. And external, you can right here, let's see, right there, you can see here, this is script equals source calculate mpg.java. Says the JavaScript file, all the JavaScript code you need is in another file. If it was also in a subdirectory, you would need to put the path of the relative subdirectory in there. A lot of times people will create a subfolder called JS for JavaScript and put all their JavaScript code in that. And I do that a lot, is that I'll have a JS file, a JS folder, a CSS folder, an IMG folder. Or you can actually put your JavaScript code. Here's an example that's embedding the JavaScript code right there, right in the HTML, usually in the header section. So external and embedded. Just like most languages, you can add comments to code, and you can comment it. The first yellow section is a block of comments. You can also use the /* and */ to comment out a large block of code. Notice the // that can often be used at the end of a line, or some people will put it like before a section to tell them what's going on. The yellow is not obviously going to be in your file. That's just highlighting the commenting of the code. That's on page 53. A little more info how to code comments: single line comment, 2 slashes, or a block comment. That can be for a large section of code, or if you're testing and debugging, you say, I don't want to have to retype this code, but this code doesn't seem to be working, so I'll comment that code out, that block of code out. Basic syntax rules for JavaScript. It looks like we're probably still on page 54, 55. JavaScript is case sensitive, so sometimes you could spell it right, but your case could be wrong, capitalizing the first letter of it has to be all in lowercase. JavaScript statement ends with a semicolon. Those of you in Python will not like that. Those of you in C will like that. JavaScript ignores extra white spaces within statements, so Python, you have to have your spaces just right when you do your indenting. C, C++, C#, white spaces are ignored, so JavaScript is the same way there. Splitting a statement, there's various ways of doing that. Brackets, parentheses, closing braces. Do not split a statement after an identifier, a value, or a return of a keyword, a closing bracket, or a closing parentheses. Now, on page 54 and 55, what they're calling identifiers, I typically would call a variable, but these are identifiers that are basically creating variable objects. The naming conventions of them are Camel case, and you can see here var processed entries equals function, var assignment investment equals parse the floating of this. So page 54 and 55 talk about assigning variables, assigning identifiers. Also, page 55 talks about reserved words that are used in JavaScript, and I'm wondering if they're not getting there. Okay. Rules for creating identifiers. Identifiers can only contain letters, numbers, the underscore, and the $sign. Identifiers can't start with a number. Identifiers are case sensitive, and identifiers can't be the same as a reserved word. On page 55, those identifier, the reserved words are listed as well. So what I typically call a variable, and again, I'm an old school programmer from the late 70s, the early 70s. JavaScript refers to as identifiers, and a lot of the naming conventions for JavaScript are very much like C and very much like Python. Valid identifiers, subtotal, index, underbar one, $sign, tax rate, calculate underbar click, $log. Those are all valid identifiers. Here's camel casing versus underscore. I've used both, and there's no real right or wrong way when to use what. I probably lean towards camel casing. A lot of times I'll use camel casing in my code, and I'll use underscores when I'm creating database columns and database fields. Naming recommendations for identifiers. This is key. Use meaningful names for identifiers. That way your identifiers aren't likely to be reserved words. Be consistent. Excuse me. Either use camel case or underscores, but whatever it is, be consistent and choose a style and stick with it in your code. It makes your code much more readable. That's the bottom of page 55. Terms. We've learned things about statement, whitespace, comment, commenting out, identifier, and camel casing. Those have all been covered up to page 55 now. Here's some examples of number values: 15, an integer, a negative integer, a decimal value, a negative decimal, and floating point. Examples of string. Notice the strings are in either double quotes or single quotes, and the quote, that's an empty string. And then Boolean is either on, off, it's either true or false, 1 or 0, and that's a very quick, fast way of determining something with a Boolean operation. So we have numeric values, we have string values, and Boolean values, and that are your primitive data types that can be talked about in page 56 and 57. Read those over. It's a pretty easy read. Again, if you're into coding, you're a programmer and you understand, then this is kind of 101 coding stuff. If you're new to programming, this is going to be a little bit different. For instance, you cannot, when you add strings together, you're actually concatenating them. You're putting it because it's a word, it's not a numeric value. So there are some things you'll learn with that. So those terms, data types, integer, decimal, infinity, negative infinity, floating point, string, data type, string, empty string, Boolean, and Boolean value, those have all been covered in 55, 56, and 58 maybe. Arithmetic operators: plus sign, minus sign, multiplication sign, parentheses, exponent, plus plus is a nice way just to add one instead of going x equals variable plus one. You can go just the variable plus plus, or minus minus will subtract one from the variable. So these are common arithmetic functions that you would do in any programming language. Order of precedence. Write this down if if you don't know this. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Please, parentheses, excuse, exponential, my, multiplication, dear, division, aunt, addition, Sally, subtraction. That is the order in which um, mathematical functions, arithmetic expressions called the order of precedence, need to be performed in from a left to right direction. So here's an example where you have the same values with the use of parentheses, and parentheses basically have the priority. And here you'll see that the first line, 3 plus 4 times 5, that multiplication is going to happen first because it's 4 times 5 will be 20 plus 3. Whereas here you have 3 plus 4 in parentheses equaling 7 times 5 will equal 35. So understanding the order of precedence is very, very important. We're getting that on page 58 and 59. Now on page 60 and 61, we're getting working with numeric values. Let's see what's on the next slide. Okay, we've covered those things. Um, Most useful assignment operators. Okay, we're looking at page 60 and 61. An assignment operation is basically when you're going to assign a value to an identifier or to a variable. So for instance, equals is an assignment operator, plus equals is an assignment operator. So you could have x equals 1, semicolon. You could have x plus equals 20. X plus equals is saying add 20 to whatever x is. Earlier we talked about that in JavaScript you have to declare your variables. Um, a lot of times you can declare a variable and not assign it a value. Just say var, and then here we have var subtotal, var investment, interest rate, and years are being done on the same line. Or if you want, you can make the assignment with the var command and then also not only declare the variable, but then assign the value to the variable as well. And here you can even see var equals subtotal $74.95. And then what we're doing, we're making the declaration of that variable and assigning it a value. And then the next line, we're adding 20 to it. So now it's equal to $94.95. Here's ways to increment a variable. First, you have to declare it, and at this point, var equals counter plus 1, var, the variable or identifier counter equals 1. Well, you can go counter equals counter plus 1. We'll add 1 to it. Now it's equal to 2. The next line is going counter plus equals 1 is adding another 1 to it, or counter plus plus does the same thing, and we'll add another 1 to it. So there are 3 different ways to do the same thing. I probably use the second one a lot, and a lot of times I'm still just old school because counter equals counter plus 1 just reads what I'm used to. But counter plus plus, that's shorthand, and that also works and is probably the more current, more cool way that younger and more current developers are used to. It's hard to teach an old dog new tricks at this recording. I am less than a month away from turning 60 years old. I took my first programming class when I was a freshman in high school in 1969. I was doing BASIC and Fortran on an IBM 360 with paper tape and rolls of paper on an old what looked like a typewriter. So you can't take that stuff away from what we grew up with. That's a friend of mine says you always go back, you dream in the language that you learned, and I learned stuff a long time ago. Floating point, result that isn't precise. So a lot of times you have to understand that when floating point math happens, like here we have a multiplication example where subtotal is being multiplied by 0.1, that value is not going to be a precise answer, and you'll have to round it up and end up formatting it to the 2-digit points. So for instance, 749.5. That's really a half a penny. That's going to go up to $7.50. I actually had many years ago, I had a situation where I was off a penny in an application that I wrote for a company, and it was driving my accountant nuts. And what we had was this exact situation where basically we had something where we were dividing a value by 2, and we were losing that extra half a penny, and I had to figure out for it and put a penny onto one product, but then take that penny off of the other product so it would all balance right. terms, variable, declaring a variable, assigning, assignment, statement, assignment, operator, and the numeric literals. We've covered all those now up into page 61. Concatenation, notice the plus sign. The plus sign here, this is for a string operation. It's not adding so you get the value. It's actually putting those strings, which are literal text, together. And you can see that Grace plus Hopper equals Grace Hopper, months plus 120. Notice the colon and the space in between the words months. And the result is months colon space 120. Plus is used in a lot of languages for the concatenate operator. Period is used in some languages as well. So in JavaScript, it's the plus sign. And notice that sometimes if you're doing it to numeric values, you'll actually get the addition function, but if you're doing it to strings, you get the concatenation operation. Escape sequences, that's when you need to do something that there isn't a easy way to type that key uh, into your code. So if you need a new line, the forward slash with the n that escape sequence will give you a new line, and the forward slash with the double quotes or the forward slash with the single quotes allows you to put in a single quote or a double quote within quoted string text. So for instance, if you had the Browns and you wanted to, the Browns and you wanted to go Brown um, apostrophe S, but you had on the outside of the string the Browns as you were making the assignment, you would use an escape character. Again, for those of you who have a lot of programming experience, this is pretty much review. We're on page 62 and 63 for that. How to declare string values without assigning them values. We've already kind of talked about that, where we're just making the declaration of those variable names, where you say var and what that variable name is. And also you can do the same thing where you can go var first name equals Grace, and then now we have another variable, last name equals Hopper. So two variables are getting assigned on that one line, and versus and then what happens is the next line, var full name equals last name plus the literal string, comma, space plus the first name, is now, it's both a declaration of that string variable and the assignment of it, where you're actually putting a value into it. So on page 62 and especially on page 63, this slide is covered where you're seeing that, like with mixed data, you have var months equals 120. Now, just by default, that's going to be an integer value, and then the word message being the word months. And now we're concatenating message with the word months, so now message is equal to months plus 120. What's nice here is that we actually, when we're concatenating those values, we don't have to change the type of integer to string to make it that value. But here's an example where you have two different variables, and we're basically two different variable types and concatenating them into one. Now here's an example of the escape sequence. Var message equals, and then here's this long string of information. Look at the semicolon at the end of the statement. Always have your semicolons at the end. Notice that that slash n. That's going to put in a new line. Notice on the second one, var message isn't the right way to do this. That slash single apostrophe will allow the literal apostrophe to go there. You'd have an error if you didn't have that escape sequence there. Escapes are probably used the most for new lines, single quotes, and double quotes. Boolean variable, var is valid equals false, and that's both a declaration and an assignment, and by assigning it to the keyword false or the keyword true, it will know that it's a Boolean variable. We've talked about concatenate, string literals. String literals are those things in quotes, those words and phrases in quotes, and escape sequences, where it's that slash t, slash n, t is for tab, slash n, slash single quote, slash double quote. So now we get into some of the cool stuff with JavaScript, and that's working with objects and in the in JavaScript. And we're going to learn the first two easiest cool one is the alert and the prompt. And playing with some examples with the alert and the prompt is really a good way to start learning how to use JavaScript. Alert will basically pop up a window message, and prompt will pop up a window that will allow you to type a value in. And you can see that piece of code, window.alert equals, this is a test of the alert method. And that's an example of code that gets used. Okay, so what I'd like to do is try to make page 64 and 65 a little more practical. And the code that I'm going to create, I will share with you, and I'll put this on the website as I display this video. So let's take a look. And basically, I pulled this from the short MPG folder and stripped it way down. So take a look at this code here. Maybe pause it and look at it. Standard lines 1 through 6 are pretty standard. And notice I'm referring to the MPG CSS file. I'm almost thinking I might just put the CSS code right in there, so I just won't have to deal with that. And then notice line 7 and line 20. That's the beginning and the ending of the embedded JavaScript. We have a function where we're getting the element names. I'm not too familiar with this, but it's getting the elements by the ID. It's loading up that so we can be referenced. And then we have this function called do this function. And then at that point, this is a function that will get called. And notice line 14 is that's where the alert is happening. And that alert will be the command that we're learning about on page 65. And then on window load, this function is loading up the run me and the full name. It's loading up those. That $sign is the $sign up in line 9 is being called by the onload at 17 and 18 to basically build up those functions and those references. And then line 23 to 28 is displaying the page. And then the key thing here is notice that we have a input box called full name, and then we have an ID here called run me. Run me on that click will then execute do this function. Do this function is here, and all I have right now is this foobar being equal to alert. And we're going to execute that. So if I was to pull up the web page, here it is. Refresh it and run this function. If I just hit the button, notice that you have just displayed this alert. And so that's happening by this code right there. And then we'll click OK. Now I'm going to pause for a minute. Okay, I've modified this code. I also took away the foobar. That was wrong code. I didn't need to do an assignment on an alert. An alert will just run. So here, notice I have alert. You have just displayed an alert. Now I'm here. It's going var foobar2 equals prompt, and it will do prompt plus the value, a kind of a default value that's being set in there. So I've added this code to our example. And so if I refresh the page, Now there's the alert working, and then if I hit OK, there's the prompt, and notice it says 100, and then I hit OK, and now it's back to the page. Now I'm going to add something else to the code. Okay, so I've modified my program a little bit. So within this, the do this function, I now have the alert. You have just displayed an alert. We have the variable assignment to foobar2 coming from the prompt, and it's going to display the prompt message. And then what we're going to do is display an alert, the literal text foobar2 equals, and then the value of the variable foobar2. So now what we can do is refresh the page, run the function. There's the alert from the first line of code. Here's the prompt, and notice by default the value 100 is there. That's happening by the second line of code here at line 15. And then we hit it again. Foobar2 equals 100 is happening from that final alert where we're concatenating the literal string to the variable foobar2. So now let's go, okay, now let's do that again, the alert, and let's put in the value, 56789, and then click OK. Notice now foobar2 equals 5,679 because we've entered in a value at that prompt. So there's a little better, I think, hands-on experience, and I'll lay that code out for you as I post this video. So you should have it as you're doing this. Also, real quick, in the meantime, what I have done is taken out the external style sheet and just embedded it right there in the top. Just that way I can have this page be a standalone page. But you'll already know that because you'll have this page. Okay, so the key here is if you look at page 65 down at the bottom, it says a statement that displays the location property of the object window, alert window location. That will show us the URL of the current page. So let's add that to our code. Let's just for fun, let's go alert window.location. Save that. We'll refresh the page. There's the first alert, our prompt, our next alert. And now, notice here, this is showing us right where that page is because of window location. That command there is showing us that information. So now we have the file name of that page. And you can see it's in my users desktop, where that page is that's being run. Okay, so in your student downloads file, zip file for this book, notice I have an instructor's one, but also there's a student one. You'll have this. You should have book apps, exercises, and solutions. Sometimes it's kind of hard to find what's going on where. So if I look in book apps, we're in chapter 2. I see information for the future value one, which we haven't gotten to yet. On page 67, it's talking about the miles per gallon. And so as I go into solutions under chapter 2, here's an MPG. And if we take a look at that, so now this is in the MPG folder. This is all the code that they're discussing in that chapter. Here, what we're introducing is the document object model and the relationship of the various elements that are on your page. So again, I wish here the book was a little clearer on referencing the code to the stuff that we're working with. We are in the we are in the solutions of chapter 2. We're looking at the index page. If you take a look here, it says student file solutions chapter 2 MPG. We're looking at the index page for that code. And what's happening here on page 67, they're teaching us a couple of things. First of all, when that page is being executed, when that page is being run, so I think I can execute the page here, index.html. So when we type in a value here and it's a value here, it's going to actually display the answer here. So we've talked about JavaScript being able to manipulate the document object model. So there's no value in miles per gallon. So we can type in a value that, I've driven 500 miles and I've used 27 gallons of gas, and I hit calculate and I'm getting 18.75 miles to the gallon. So there's the behavior that we see in the MPG solutions folder where we're typing in a value here, typing in a value here, and it's giving us an answer. When we type the value in at this point, JavaScript's going to see that number 500 and that number 27. It's going to see those as strings, and because it's just text. And what we have to do is we have to convert those numbers into numerics that can then actually do the math. And to do that, it's done by what some languages would call cast a variable type. Here it's casting the variable with the parse int and the parse float, and you'll see that on halfway through page 67 is and now let's look at the code for that. That here, whoops, here we have the form that is inputting in the data, and the ID is going to be miles, and the ID for the gallons of gas used. And here the display is set to disabled, so you can't, the word disabled is saying don't allow a person to enter text here, and that's for the MPG field. And so what happens is up in the code, when we do the calculate, and we process the entries, we're parsing the information from the miles field and we're to a float, and we're parsing the gallons to an integer. And then at that point there, which is interesting because maybe somebody went, added 10 and a half gallons. So maybe you could think about the rules. And then it's making sure that when you parse those miles and gallons, it's making sure that both of the entries after doing that parse equation are in fact numeric. So what would happen if I actually tried to, you know, I tried to go miles driven Paul calculate. Now it's popping up an alert that says both entries must be numeric. And that alert is happening right here. This alert, both entries must be numeric. If both entries are numeric, the miles and the gallons are numeric, then it's going to take the MPG field value and is actually going to then, it's going to return the results of calculate MPG. This function here, calculate MPG, is up here where basically it's taking the miles and the gallons and doing the math, and then so it's assigning the value, and then it's actually returning this function back to MPG so that MPG comes back here. The answer basically comes back here, and then this is getting assigned to the display on the form. So here we go. I go 100 miles and I've used 5 gallons of gas. I hit calculate, and now the 20 is being displayed there. So that's happening I hate that, sorry. That's happening here. See mpg.value. MPG is referencing the piece on the form down here to basically say put that value into that place because it's disabled. If I was to temporarily take out this word disabled, I'll exit out and I'll save my form. I'll refresh the form. Uh, Boom, 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 boom. It didn't like it. Did I need to do something else? File, save. Boom. I don't know why. Maybe it's stuck in cache. Okay. So it got me. I thought that would do it. Was there something else that I forgot to do on that? Um, the word disabled, I think, is the only thing that is causing that to be read only. Maybe that's to say enabled. Okay, I'm not going to sweat that out. This video is getting long already. So hopefully, by looking at that code in the MPG solutions, along with the sample code that I just created, some of these pages make a little more sense. Let's see what happens when we move on. Are we having fun yet? There's a lot of information here, and like I said, this is like weeks worth of material just covered in one chapter. So the prompt, we've already covered that, where basically we're assigning a Alt-Shift-D. We're assigning a variable to the results that is returned from prompt. And so, and here, this 100 right here is the default that's being displayed here. And when we type something different in here, we are going to get that response assigned to user entry. And when we ran our little Professor Gruhn test, when we added our Professor Gruhn test, here's our first alert, there's our prompt, and it's saying 100. We assigned the number 5002, and it's going to get assigned to a variable called foobar, and then we display that in an alert. And then we also use that window location then to display that, which we saw earlier. Okay, moving on. So right here is the alert window dot location, which is that last part of the prof test one. Bunch of terms that we've just learned. One method of document object for getting HTML objects is the ID. So notice here that we have objects. The key thing here is Alt Shift Delete. The key thing here is here's our HTML form right here. Our HTML form has elements on it, has text fields on it that we're going to type values in. And we called one of them miles and we called one of them gallons. And now we can get the value of what's in miles and gallons by the get element by ID. So from the current document, this method, get the element by this ID, that ID is over there, will then be assigned to the variable gallons that we can then use in our code. Looks like a kindergartner drew that. We've talked about parsing the int and parsing the float because you got to remember the information coming from the form is coming into the code, has a string, and we then have to convert that to a numeric value so that it will be able to do arithmetic to it. And then here's the math to that, where we're getting, oh, this is an interesting thing here, is what's happening here. Here's an example of a prompt. Prompt, enter the miles driven, and then it's parsing it. Prompt, enter the gallons, and it's parsing that. And then we could actually then get the results of that. So you could go do a prompt, and then do the math, and then display the alert with the answer. Give me a minute, and I'll put that code into our prof test one. Okay, so I've added some code to our little prof test where we're going to do this prompting of the miles, do the prompting of the gallons, and let's take a look at that code. What's going to happen here, it's going to go through the stuff we've done with foobar and the testing and the window location. Then it's going to prompt us for how many miles did you drive, setting a default to 0 and assign it to miles. We're going to parse that string into an integer to miles. We're then going to get prompt again for the gallons. How many gallons of gas did you use? Parse that to a float. Then we're going to do the math, and then we're going to display an alert to show us the answer. We're going to cross our fingers, refresh the page. Okay, this is old news, old news, old news. Okay, old news, the window. So I drove 200 miles. I've used 8 gallons of gas, and now that final alert, your miles is 25 miles to the gallon. It's 25. So now you can see that we have this JavaScript function that is running and working, and we can prompt for data along the way. Also, I find that the alert box is a good way to debug and test something, because what you can do is you can pop in an alert anytime you want just to display a value. What do I think it is? And is the data from my form actually making it up into my function? I probably use alerts when I've done JavaScript coding, use alerts more than anything to test and debug. That alert statement just popping up saying, this is what X equals, can be very, very helpful. Okay, we've just finished talking about parsing and changing data from text to numeric so we could do math to them. And the focus, basically, that focus command that is on in that code, basically, that's where the cursor will go when you're done. And right here, this guy here, document get element by ID first name dot value. What we're able to do is use that method, use that command to get the information that is in that field. And the way that I can, and here what's happening is this first line is saying assign first name to the value that is in the text form called first name, and then it's pulling from that type. It's then pulling from that type. It's called without chaining, getting the value of that piece. I like this second, what their JavaScript is calling with chaining, where it's all one line. Document, get the element, here's the field name of that text box and the value. And what I did was this. I took our little prof test program, and right here, the very first line to it, you'll see that line there. And if that line is commented out, just uncommented it. And then what's going to happen is alert, it's going to go to the document, get the element by the ID called full name, and get that value and display it in an alert box. So if we pull up our prof test 1 example, refresh the page, type in Fred Flintstone, and then hit run this function, notice Fred Flintstone is displaying, and that Fred Flintstone displaying in the alert box is by the fact that we are doing what their JavaScript is called chaining, and I'm just using the whole thing of getting the value, the information, get that element called full name and its value by that. So that's what's going on page 69. We got a few more. Let's see, trying to get up to page 90 something, 93, I guess. So can we do this? Okay, we're about 50 minutes into it, so I'm hoping. So bear with me, it's going to be a little long. How to use date and string objects. We could spend 2 hours on this. What to do is using the prof test 1 page, take a look at page 71 and put those examples in there. Matter of fact, let me just cut and paste those examples if they're in fact on the in the HTML here in the PowerPoint. Boom. Okay, var new date. Yes. Okay, I'm going to grab this code right here, and I'm going to put that code into, and I'll comment out everything else and put this in. Okay, give me a minute. Okay, so what I've done is right here, this piece of code, which you can find on page 71 towards the top, examples that use the date object, is the code is var today, a variable, an identifier called today is equal a new date, which is basically now. And now what we want to do is we want to convert it to a string. We want to get the year, we want to get the date, we want to get the month. And we're just going to display those in alerts. So here's the code. As you can see, I've commented out all the code, and hopefully you got the code all commented out. So here's that code, var today equals new date, and alert, 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 and it's going to be date to string, full year, the month, the day, and the month. Okay. So let's take a look at the function, and then so there's the string of the date, the first alert. There's the year. There's the date. Today's the 16th, Sunday, and there's the month. And notice it says 9 for the month, and the reason for that is um, in the array, the first value is not 1, the first value is 0. And so at that point, the month is always going to be less 1. So if you really wanted to show, if you're using this, you'd have to go plus 1 to make it the 10th. I know we talked about that in the Python class, how arrays don't start at 1, they start at 0 and go 0 to 9. And 0 is actually the starting point, is the 0 is the first reference of the element of the array. Okay, so again, what's really interesting to me is this would actually be, I think, chapter 8 or 9 in the Python book, where we talk about string functions, and they're doing it all on one slide. They're actually probably capturing the most commonly used, the index of. Index of method is where is a certain letter or located in a string. A substring says get me from this point to that point, um, and to uppercase or to lowercase is how do I convert it to all uppercase or how do I convert it to all lowercase. So there's some string functions that are listed there. And you can play with these and watch them appear in an alert. Take that example program and you could create a variable with lowercase and convert it to an uppercase and things like that. Okay, so it wasn't that hard for me to come up with a quick example for that for you. Um, Basically, I'm going to go var my full name equals, and so now I am declaring an identifier, my full name, and I'm going to get the element called full name. Remember we had that on the form, and we're going to get that value of full name. And I'm basically going to take my full name variable there, and I'm going to convert it and display it in an alert to lowercase, and then display it in an alert to uppercase. So we're going to type something into the form, hit the button. I've got all this other code that we've created, commented it out, and we should see the upper and lowercase work. So here's our form. I refreshed it, and if I go Professor Paul Gruhn, now remember, um, matter of fact, I'm going to make one quick change. Hang on a second. Okay, I've modified the code, and what I have is we're going to get the value from the form, get from that location in the text box called full name. We're going to assign that value to my full name. I'm going to first display it the way it is typed, this alert. Then I'm going to convert it to lowercase. Then I'm going to convert it to uppercase and display that in the alerts. So now, so here, refresh the page, and I'm going to run this function. There's the alert with it as I typed it. And so that is basically happening from this line of code here, line 47. Then you're going to see it flip to lowercase and then flip to uppercase. There's lowercase, everything's in lowercase, and there it is in uppercase. So you can see how those string methods can help control the data. Also, using those string methods when you're not sure what's going to happen from when you're not sure what's going to happen from for data entry from the user, then what you can do is you can put it all to uppercase or all to lowercase to then use it to compare in the if statement. Okay, so I just took a look at the time, and I've been chatting and doing stuff now for 55 minutes, and we're on slide 50, and we have 100 slides to go. So what I want to do is if you are totally overwhelmed right now, please don't worry. What I'm really hoping is that the book will not require us to use a whole lot of the detailed programming information here. Either that, or I might have to punt and come up with a free online book that'll make this a little easier. But let's keep chugging through it and seeing how we go on this. And I will be open to your feedback and input on this. What I'm feeling a little bit is that I'm curious how many of you have programming experience that you'll be able to handle this versus who have no programming experience that some of this might get overwhelmed, and I almost need to turn this into a intro to programming using JavaScript class. So we'll kind of go back and forth on this, and I don't want you to give up on me or the class or the book, because the book is excellent. But what I'm wondering is if it might be a little too difficult, but we'll keep plugging through. So keep reading through the rest of the chapter. I'm going to publish this video and then see about making another fast video for the rest of the chapter, and we'll go from there.